Good morning, everybody. How is everybody today? It's a beautiful day, isn't it? Welcome to Week of Gratitude. I'm Dr. Sindel Arrington, and this is our fourth annual year of Week of Gratitude. And this year, our theme is Grateful for Community. So, that gratitude of community is really important. You know, we're all better when we're together, right? So, you're in for a treat today. Again, thank you so much for coming. Um, we have a wonderful, wonderful guest. She's a wonderful speaker and author, but I'm not going to introduce her. I'm going to have someone else. So, if you can give it up for Maria Rodriguez, she's going to come up right now and introduce our speaker.
So I'm here to introduce Sara Slattery. I'm English faculty. I noticed some of you in the audience here. And I had Sara Slattery come and talk today for two reasons. The first reason is she wrote this awesome book, How She Did It. And it covers the last 2 decades of women's running professionally at the college level, and really talks about not just how to be a better runner, but what it takes as a running community to support women's athletics as well. Uh, the second reason I asked Sara to come is I know Sara on a personal level. We went to high school together, and we graduated high school in 2000. So it's been 24 years. So we were actually athletes together. We were teammates and ran cross country and track together. And when I say that, I meant I like ran behind her. Actually, I didn't run with her because she was a lot faster than me. But um, the one thing I want to talk about with Sara, just to introduce her to, is like, yeah, she was this fantastic athlete. She went to the Olympic trials. She was in the 2004, 2008, 2012, and 2016 to run in the Olympic trials. She won 4 national championships as a college athlete. She held the state record here in Arizona for almost 2 decades in the mile and the 2 mile. These are all great accomplishments. She accomplished a lot in those last 20 years of running. Um, but on a more personal level, I just want to share a story with you guys about how she affected my life, as not just as a runner, but as a person, as a teacher, why I'm here today. So the story I like to tell is about our senior year of high school when we were attending Mountain Pointe High School. And my senior year, I had senioritis really bad. I was like every other senior. You don't want to come to campus. You definitely don't want to wake up at 5 in the morning to go run 5, 6, 7, 8 miles. And I think my senior year, I really actually wanted to quit the cross country team. I was not going to go run somewhere on a scholarship. I didn't have an academic scholarship. So I had a lot of friends that were running at University of Colorado, Pepperdine, or invited to Stanford. And for me, I was like, I think I'm done with running. But I was convinced by Sara and other teammates to keep running. Um, so I remember one particular day we were at practice, and one of our runs was doing a mile warm up to South Mountain. So we ran from the high school to the mountains, and that was a mile warm up. And then we would run in the mountains on the trails for 4, 5, 6 miles in the mountains. And then we would run a mile back. So if you could total that, I don't know, what is it, 6 to 8 miles in a run. And I remember we had our last mile run running back towards the school, and it was hot. It was over 100 degrees. And you could see literally the wave of heat off the blacktop because it was Arizona and you're running cross country. And there's things that happen to you when you're a runner, a distance runner. If any of you have ran a 5K or over, there's things that kind of happen as you're running. First, your body kind of feels it, right? Like you start to feel tired and tight. A lot of runners will end up, their posture kind of goes. And then some people start to kind of look down. So you physically just start kind of feeling yourself, um, getting worn down. And I was there, I was at that moment, and that last mile, that last stretch. And then sometimes mentally you can start going into negative places, I guess you could say, like, man, I just don't feel good. This is hard. I don't, I just want to stop, right? And I remember I could hear Sara running behind me. She often did. She would pass me. And I think she could tell I was really having a hard day. And I could feel her hand on my back, and she was literally pushing my back to keep going. And I remember at that moment, I was really needing someone to to push me because I was struggling. And I don't remember what she said, if she just said, keep going or keep trying. But for me, that was kind of a moment that I remembered the rest of my life, because when things get really rough or things get really tough in life, you have to keep going, even when you feel like it's really hard. Um, so in regard to that story I'm telling you guys about Sarah's character, what I'm really getting at is that sometimes we just need that teacher, that coach, or that friend or that mentor that's going to probably believe in us more than we believe in ourselves, or we can't really get through things. And that's why I'm here to introduce Sarah today, because it was more, yes, we ended up being winning state that year for track, and there were a lot of things that happened that year, but it was way more than running. It had a lot to do with character building, and it had a lot to do with building that community and my character. I definitely don't think I would be here today if it wasn't for cross country and running and being a female athlete. So I I'm going to introduce Sarah now and stop with my story, but I just kind of had to share that story with you guys, just to um, for you guys to understand the connection we have, and a little bit about Sarah's character too. Not just like she's this great runner, but she's also this great person. So, okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for the really nice introduction. Maria says that, but she was a very good runner, and everyone plays a role on the team when you're a part of a team, and I think that's important because Maria, she likes to tell jokes, but she always kept everyone positive and happy on the team, and was a big part of our success as a group. So I think sometimes you can look at sport and see just the top runner being the most important piece, or the top player, or the best players, but there's an important role for every person on the team, and it might not be where they're the top scorer or um, the top athlete, but each person brings something to make those people better each day. So I appreciate that introduction, and I am very grateful to be here today. This topic of gratitude is, I think, very, very important in sport and in life. The community and the gratitude you have for what you're doing can take you really far, and if we lose sight of that, it can make things very self-centered and self-centered, and not encompassing the importance of what you're doing every time. So I wanted to start with a photo today, right here, and I know there's a few runners in the audience, but I want you to look at this photo. This is a photo of the Florence Diamond League final this summer in 2023. And all of these women are embracing right here Faith Kipyegon. And she broke the world record in the 1500 meters, running 349.11, breaking the 350 mark for the 1500 meters. Most of you guys don't know what that means. In 1500 meters, we don't really do that in the US as much. We look at mile. That's like a 404 mile. She was the first woman to run under 350. But what was amazing with this photo is the amount of women that were genuinely excited for her, and they, as soon as she finished the race and they got done, they embraced her because they knew how significant this was, and not only what this was for her, but in that race there were 3 national records that were set by other international women. There were 5 PRs, and there were 8 world leading times for that year, 2023, that were set in that one race. So not only was she breaking barriers for herself and for women at that time, but she was elevating everyone around her. And I think we can sometimes see, well, this is a significant shot of gratitude with these women. And I think in our sport and in sports in general, we sometimes see that with someone else's success, and we can get caught in this trap where someone else's success is taking away from our own. But clearly here, her success was helping elevate everyone around her and helping other girls see if she can do it, I could do it someday. And this barrier, and we've seen this in the past with a lot of things. Even in another mile, I think the most significant mile barrier that we saw was in the 50s with Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute barrier. And within 2 weeks after doing that, they had several men break that barrier, and it became, I think there's over 500 or 1,000 men now that have done it. So it's just sometimes seeing it happen can help change and change that barrier for other people to know that it can be done. So this picture, I feel, for gratitude, and a lot of you are athletes, it's important to understand that we can all understand it, like being grateful for where we are and our opportunities, and the people around us, they can help make us better. So yeah, I wanted to start off with that. I'm going to give you a little bit of background. I know Maria went into it. I grew up here in Arizona. I started off, my parents were from the Midwest and moved here, and I grew up in Ahwatukee, Arizona. I grew up playing lots of different sports. I tried everything that I could. My parents were very encouraging for me to try different things. So I started dance, did gymnastics, t-ball, swimming. I played a lot of co-ed sports because they didn't have men. They didn't have a lot of just women's sports at the time. So I grew up in the 80s, and they were just starting a lot of like girls team sports. So I played co-ed soccer and t-ball, and then I went on to play softball. But I really grew a love for swimming. I think growing up in Arizona with the heat, like it was the best sport you could be involved in, and to stay out of that. And so I got really serious about swimming and swam year round for about 10 years. And I really thought that was my dream, to go to the Olympics and swimming, and swim at a high level. And so I continued to swim club for a long time and played some other sports in between. I started running track and cross country in middle school, and that was the first time I really tried running. I had a knack for endurance, probably from the swimming, but right away I did really well at the middle school level without really any training, but still felt like I was meant to be a swimmer. So I continued to swim, and my freshman year of high school, I decided to swim instead of run cross country that season, and did well. Was like top 8 in all of my events at the state meet. And then my dad really pushed me that spring to try track. Even though I had club swimming in the spring, my dad was like, "Look, you did really well in middle school, and it's not, there's no, like, the track season, like it's an opportunity to play for your high school." So I went out for track that season, and ended up getting second in state in 4 events: the 800 mile, 2 mile, and our 4x8 was second as well. And my dad was like, "Look, you've hardly trained at all. You should really stick with this." So I continued to run. I decided to run cross country that next fall instead of swim, and ended up winning 10 state titles, and was the first person in my family to get an athletic scholarship to the University of Colorado, and then went on to run at Colorado and be a part of national championship team, and win some individual championships, and went on to run professionally. But I think I was very grateful, one, to have those opportunities to play sports, because my mom and my grandmother didn't have those opportunities. But I also, uh, um, it was like when I was first, I really didn't have, like, my grandparents and my mother didn't have that because of Title IX. And my first real experience with Title IX, how many of you guys know what Title IX was? Okay, so Title IX was the federal law that gave prohibited sex-based discrimination for school or education programs to give equal opportunities to men and women in the education scene. So it provided that was in school and through athletics. So that changed things significantly, where they had to provide the same programs for both men and women for sports, for academics, scholarship opportunities. So it really opened the door for women. But my experience, so that happened in 1972, and they had the 50th anniversary in this 2022. So like right when my book came out, but they that opened the door for a lot of women to have those opportunities to play. So like I was saying, even in the 80s when I was first starting, that was like 10 years post Title IX. A lot of our youth sports were still co-ed because they didn't have teams for girls, and girls were just starting to play those things. But I didn't really see that until the difference in gender with sports. I didn't really see that. I didn't notice it even when I was playing co-ed sports really until high school. My first real eye opener to that was when I went out for that track team that year. And when I was swimming, men's and women's, like it was more based on your ability. When you were in the pool, you were put in lanes based on how fast you could swim. So you would be mixed with men and women in each lane. We would all do the same workouts, and it was no real gender differences, right? I went to the track that spring, and our track teams were separated, men's and women's. So we had a men's program and a women's program. We had different coaches. Our men's coach was like an old school football coach. His name was Carl Kiefer, and he was there. He had been coaching probably for like 30 years. So at that time, he went on to he was one of the most winning football coaches in Arizona history. I think he's in the Hall of Fame here in Arizona for the Coaching Hall of Fame. But he was a great coach. He was also our FCA director, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, which I was a part of at the time. But he wanted to keep both programs separate. We went to separately. We had practice separately. We would practice at the track at the same time, but we didn't interact a lot. And so I went to do my first workout for Mountain Pointe, and our coach was giving us the workout. We were going to do quarters that day on the track. And she said, just make sure you stay out of lane 1. Everybody, like, you need to stay, everyone needs to be, and we can run lane 2 and 3, and just make sure you don't go in lane 1. And I had to ask her again, like, wait, what? Like, why don't we run in lane 1? And she said, well, the men run in lane 1 and we run in lanes 2 and 3. And I was like, well, why do we run in lanes 2 and 3 and the men run in lane 1? And at that time, I had run about 5 minutes in the mile, and there's probably 2 or 3 men that were faster than me in my events at the time. So she was like, well, we're just not as fast as the men, so we run in lanes 2 and 3 and they run in lane 1. And I just couldn't get over it. We did the workout that day and I stayed in lanes 2 or 3. But I was like, I just don't understand. So I was like, I don't know how to handle this in the right way, but I know Coach Kiefer, and he was kind of an intimidating person at the time. But I was like, I go to FCA, I've gotten to know him very well, so I'm just gonna have a conversation. I think that's the best way I could handle this. So I went to FCA the next week, and after the meeting was over, I came up to Coach Kiefer, introduced myself again, and just asked him, like, hey, Coach, like, why can't I run in lane 1? Like, I'm equally as good as most of the men's team. We're gonna race in lane 1, and we're trying to understand the tactics of racing. And if you're running in lane 2 the whole time, like, you're never gonna like be able to utilize, like, you're never gonna be able to practice the way you should compete. we had a conversation for a little while, and then, and I also, I think, understood at the time that he was coaching at a time where there weren't women's sports when he started out, and then it slowly started integrating, and he saw things differently than I did. So we ended up having that conversation, and the next week, he actually changed the rule, and we were able to start running in lane one. And I know that sounds so backwards and so crazy, a little bit crazy in the time that we're in now, but it taught me a lot, because all it took was a conversation to change something. And and he was also like very willing to change by just having a conversation, instead of griping about it or being upset and not having the courage to discuss things, even when you're not on the same playing field. So like, I was very grateful to have that experience, because it taught me a lot moving forward in the future. And sometimes, like, I think you need to be grateful for the opportunities that you have, but you have to also, if you can change things for the future that can be better for people around you, not be afraid to go after those and change that for to make it better for the next generation. And yeah, I think that was kind of my first experience, like seeing something different with women and men, and how Title IX changed things. But as I move forward, and I think I asked you guys this before, how many of you guys had mothers that played sport? Okay, like most of you. How many of you had grandmothers that played sports, like high school or college? So like 3 or 4. Okay. So yeah, like my mother got to play sports. She went to a Catholic all-girls school. It was the beginning. She was in school in the late 60s, early 70s, before Title IX, and they were just starting girls sports. She had to she had to make her own uniform and then rent it back from the school at the time, because they didn't even have uniforms to wear for meets, so she played basketball, softball, and cheerleading, and she did all 3. Any opportunity she had, she did it. But yeah, they didn't have anything, so they had to make it and then rent it back from the school. And then she didn't really have any opportunities after that to continue. My grandmother, there were no sports at the time, so she was involved in a lot of activities, and she taught herself how to do a lot of things. But I really believe, like, she would have been a great athlete as well, but just didn't have the opportunities. But so as I was going through sport, and as I had that experience, I was very grateful that I got to be involved in those things, and I got to go on and have these experiences in college and beyond. But what it taught me was more than just being able to accomplish these things, was the confidence that it gave me. I was a really shy girl that probably wouldn't have had the courage to do things outside of my comfort zone if it wasn't for sport. So I was less scared to go after big goals in my career and as a person, because sport gave me that confidence. And I think one of the statistics that I found most eye-opening with Title IX was that 80% of female managers of Fortune 500 companies played a high school or college sport. So we're seeing that, and it's not just a gender thing. You will see the same stat for for males as well, that sport gives you the confidence to be in team situations where you're learning to interact with teams. Like I was saying, every person plays a role, and within companies, that's the same thing. Every person is important. And sport teaches you how to not be afraid to set goals, set high goals, go after those goals, and not be afraid to fail. So you see that with this stat, with a lot of these people that are managing big companies, they're having sports backgrounds, and those early interactions and those things, lessons that they're learning in sport are teaching them to be able to manage that later on in life. I think the other interesting stat, and this is for both men and women, is that high school men and women who participate in sports are 10 times less likely to drop out of school, drink, or become pregnant. And it seems like a very not a very eye-opening stat, but it is, because it same thing. You're going after goals. You have important things that you're setting yourself up for, that you're not going to be distracted by doing some other these other things, because you are goal driven. So I think is grateful that I had that, because I was too busy to be worried about drinking, or I wanted to make sure I got good grades so that I could go on and do things in the future and be able to accomplish those goals. And if I wasn't goal focused, I wouldn't have had those opportunities. So I think those were two of the biggest stats that I felt were significant. Maria told you one of those things that I wasn't afraid to go after, and this is writing this book. And it wasn't, I was so grateful for those opportunities, but I also saw a lot of girls at the time when I was in high school that were very accomplished and as equally accomplished as I was, and talented, go through the sport and not make it when they went on to college or beyond college in the professional ranks. And I was lucky. One of my best friends, Molly Huddle, who helped co-authored this book with me, she was I think a 27-time US champion. And she was a very high level high school athlete and was an NCAA champion in college. But we saw so many women of our competitors that weren't able to continue through sport. But we also saw we grew up in a time where there wasn't social media, and there wasn't a lot of information on women's running and how and there's differences. There's things that women deal with that men don't, and we were always the type of athletes that we wanted to know more. We wanted to know how we could get better. We wanted to understand how we can improve ourselves, and so both Molly and I wanted to give back, and we wanted to share the information that we knew with including some of the top expert advice in sports psychology, nutrition, bone health. We brought together, we wanted them to understand those things, that the key pieces that they needed to have longevity in the sport and continue as a healthy runner throughout their lives. But we knew that when we were athletes, we could have heard that all day long from our coaches or our parents, but we weren't going to listen to it unless we knew it played out well in other athletes. And so we felt like it was huge for us to include the stories of the women that have been in the sport for a long time and had successful careers. So we knew we wanted to include as many women as we could, and at the time that most of these women competed, there wasn't social media and there wasn't a lot of information on these women. The internet was there weren't a lot of interviews or personal connections where you could understand where these women were coming from. So we really wanted to do a book that we could help the next generation. They could connect the key pieces for longevity, but also see that play out with these women. and also understand that most of these women, their stories weren't like a straight line of trajectory. That there's often, almost every woman in this book, there's a hurdle to overcome, and how they got out the other side and made it. And I think that's key, not only with these women, but it happens in life. Like, things don't just happen overnight. It's not always a smooth road to get there, that you're gonna overcome some hurdles to get there and come out and make good decisions to come out the other side. So but the other key piece we included was the history of our women's distance running. And so a lot of the we include Title IX in there and how it impacted the women that were in this story, and the opportunities that it gave, and where it came. And so I think one of the um, one of the best ways that our book showed this was we had two mother-daughter combinations, we had three mother-daughter combinations in the book, where that competed in distance running. So the mother was very high level, and then the daughter went on to come into the sport as well. I think the best example of it was, this is Molly and I competing, and then later on. But the best mother-daughter combo is Cheryl Flanagan-Twergy and Shalane Flanagan. So Cheryl grew up in the 60s and was started running watched the Boston Marathon, started watching, wanted to run, always had a lot of high energy, didn't have opportunities to compete. And she just started running because she wanted to compete in some of these marathons. She went on to Indiana State University, and she started seeing the men. They had a men's track team and cross country program, but they didn't have a women's program. So she just started showing up to the practices, and the coach kind of discouraged her at first, but then she'd just jump on the back, and then she was keeping up with all the men. And I think she would have made their varsity team. So she became close with the coach, and he ended up giving her a scholarship on the men's side before they even had women's athletic scholarships. So she's technically the first woman to receive an athletic scholarship in all of the NCAA. So she kind of paved her own way to get on and get a scholarship to college. She went on to get the got the American record in the marathon. She also patented the first sports bra. So she was training during this time, and they didn't have women's equipment or athletic gear. So she's like, "Oh, they don't have anything. I'm going to do my own." So she and some friends, she ended up like sewing together a sports bra and decided to patent it. So she started her own sports bra company. But she went on. Her and her husband had two daughters, and her daughter Shalane and ended up playing a lot of sports growing up. Went on to discover running, and she was a 5-time NCAA champion, or four-time NCAA champion, 4-time Olympian, the bronze medalist at the 2008 Olympic Games in the 10,000 meters, and she was the winner of the New York City Marathon. But I think outside of these accomplishments, what this showed really was Shalane took it to a whole new level in terms of what she was able to accomplish after her mother. Part of that's genetics, but part of that, I think, is the fact that her mother's generation and these women really opened the doors for them to go on and be able to accomplish. Shalane didn't have to overcome as many hurdles as her mom, and she was able to really flourish and accomplish these big things. Her mom opened these doors, really had to pave the way to be able to do these things, and she accomplished a lot. But Shalane was able to really flourish without having to overcome those same hurdles. So I think to kind this together is it's really important. Like gratitude is a huge part of this. Like being grateful. When we look at sport, it's like I said at the beginning, it's really hard to find. There's always things that we can find that need to be improved. We really need to always be grateful for those opportunities that we have. And then I think it's really important that we find ways that we can change and make those things better for the next generation. And I think with the women like Cheryl, there's women that were in her time, Jacqueline Hansen, who was also a woman that competed at the same time. She never got to, until 2008, we didn't have equal events in the Olympics. And for a long time, the longest event that women could compete in was the 800 meters. That changed in 1972 with the addition. They were able to add the 1500 meters and then eventually the marathon and the 5K and 10K. But Jacqueline was a woman that allowed them to add those events. She never got to compete in those events. She wanted to compete in those events, and she opened the door for those other women to compete in those events. But I think she took advantage of every opportunity she had, and then she really tried to change that for the women after her. And I think if you look at, if you could just look at every opportunity you have and take advantage of it, and then look for ways that you can improve for the next generation, I think we all could make this an amazing environment to be a part of. So thank you guys. I hope you enjoy. I hope you can all take a piece of gratitude with you and really look at ways that you can improve the things that you're involved in. Is there, now if there's any questions, I'd love to do a few questions or any things you wanted to ask. Yeah, I think this is a high point in women's athletics right now. I think we're starting to see with even the NCAA level with women's basketball, you're seeing, and part of it, I think, with social media and those things, but Caitlin Clark is getting as much attention as most of the men in the NCAA tournament. So they're elevating the game. They're getting more exposure. We're seeing with NIL stuff, they're making as much money as the men in terms of their following and excitement around them. And we're seeing this now with like the women's soccer leagues. Like I think last night they were doing interviews with Patrick Mahomes, and he's now sponsoring the Kansas City professional women's soccer team. His wife was Brittany Mahomes was a high level soccer player in college, and they both invested interest in like elevating the women's soccer. So I think with more exposure, it takes a while. Like the Title IX was 50 years, but it's been 50 years since Title IX, but it takes a while to like start to get the same exposure on that same level. But I think we're starting to see more and more excitement around it, and more women getting access to those things just helps. So I think it's a good time. They didn't have that when I was they didn't have the pacer. Yes. Oh yeah. He asked if I have done the pacer test, and if I have, what was my score? I've not done the pacer test. I find it very interesting, and I think it would be fun to do, but they didn't have that when I was competing as an athlete. My daughter is involved in soccer now, so I think she's probably going to end up doing the pacer test. but I sadly have not done that, so I don't know what my score is. I think that's a really tough question today. My opinion, first, on a whole level of sport, I I don't think that anyone should be excluded from sport, especially with the things that I was touching on in terms of the community involvement, that the confidence that sports gives you, the community it creates. I think competing and being involved in the running community is such a big part of my life, and there are so many great people involved. I would want everyone to be able to share that. At the elite level, it gets more tricky, just with the advantages at a biological state from birth that men versus women have, and when you're bringing in, I I don't know enough on the science part of it to know that um, where you could be like you could make it equal if you're trying to change someone's biological background. So I think I've read a decent amount on the topic where it seems like it's um, hard to figure out how to um, find the hormones to suppress that to make it on equal playing field, just because of the advantages you have from birth, if you're a male, um, in the like competing in the female category. Um, and I also, um, yeah, so I think there's still a lot more that needs to be done in terms of like research to figure out how to make that an equal playing field. But I think in terms of like uh community competition, I feel like everyone should be included in sport, and it's an important part of our community. I think it just needs to be figured out. We need to do more research to figure out how to make it a level playing field. Well, so I think right now on the elite level, I don't see it being equal. I don't see it being fair. So I don't think that they should allow, I don't think they should allow it yet until they figure out how to make it an equal playing field. So yes, I do have some issues with, in terms of like the biological, just from what uh, some of the studies that I've seen, it it's a complete, even if you're on the hormone suppressants, you have men from birth have larger lungs, bigger muscle capacity, um, and even if you're suppressing the testosterone, um, you can't take away those things. You can't change those things. But also being said, and this is a counter argument to what I'm saying, is a lot of elite level athletes have a biological advantage over other people. So there can be a counter argument to that. And there's women, everyone has different hormone levels, and some people are, taller and stronger than others. But with the biological background of males versus females, that on average, that's significantly different. Yeah. Yes. Uh, I think I'm always someone that wants to. I failed a lot. I think and that was a key theme in our book, is not being afraid to fail. Um, failure, failure helps you. Failure is an important part of learning how to improve. So I think that was the biggest theme in our book, was um, those the road to success is not a straight line trajectory, like we were saying, and there's a lot of bumps along the way. I had I had 2 major surgeries. I had probably 10 stress fracture, or I had in college I had 5 stress fractures, 2 major surgeries, um and some illness along the way. And it's just figuring out how to adapt to those things, not not learning from that and moving forward and making yourself better. Because and then that taught me later on in my life with other things, like that's just part of the process. Like this bump in the road, we'll figure it out and move forward. And you see that in almost in any situation you're in, with if you're starting a business, if you're playing a sport, if you have a family, you have to figure out how to how to handle failure and move to adapt to be successful later on. So I think I never, my dad was always someone I could talk to when I was younger, who would lift me up when I was struggling. I think you always have to be surrounded by people that kind of help you adapt in those situations. I feel like there's always people that are going to try to tear you down, but you need to be surrounded by the people and listen to the people that lift you up and make you want to keep going. And I had teammates like Maria, and I had an amazing high school coach, and we had fun, and we lifted each other up, no matter if it was on like in sports or it was in school or whatever. We wanted to help each other. Yeah, I think NIL is interesting. I think it's the wild, wild west right now in terms of the NIL, because it's so new. So they're trying to figure out rules and how to regulate this and make it good for the athletes, where they don't get taken advantage of, and also for the schools. One of my close friends from college was a professional skier and football player, and he was involved in the starting of the NIL. Like he pushed really hard, but his name is Jeremy Bloom, and he competed at the 2002 Olympics in mogul skiing. And if any of you guys know, like I went to the University of Colorado, so there was a lot of skiers there, but it's very expensive if you're a professional skier, because you have to go to these qualifying races, and then a lot of them are throughout Europe. So you have to qualify to get into these and go on the circuit. But he got a full scholarship to University of Colorado for football. And he couldn't accept any of the prize money or any of the like money to pay for expenses for skiing, because technically he would be considered a professional athlete. So he was doing all this out of pocket, and he made the Olympic team, played for CU, was like an All-American, I think, his freshman year, and sophomore year. And then the NCAA, he was going to try to qualify for his second Olympics. And in order to do that, he was going to have to do that whole circuit again. But he's a college student. He couldn't there is rules in place where you can't make money as an NCAA student outside of, I think it was like $5,000. I don't know. It was like they had a number, and it was going to cost significantly more for him to be able to do this. So he accepted the money, and he was trying to sue the NCAA. He lost. They took his eligibility away, and so he never got to compete his last 2 years of football. And he was kind of spearheading this, like, and that's a case where that should never have happened. Like, he was accepting money for a completely separate sport to be able to pay to go to an Olympic team. And that was kind of a big reason why NIL was put in there, but it was also for schools that were making millions and millions off of football, and the athletes were not seeing any of that. And like you were saying, getting injured and not being able to have a career and not being able to pay for some of the injuries that they had and the long-term health issues. So I think the intent is good. I think there's a lot that still they need to figure out in terms of rules and how it works. But I think it also puts a lot of pressure on college kids it's professionalizing college athletics. So it's just changing the sport in a completely different direction. Not where it was amateur, but not amateur. So it was kind of in between where they're getting scholarships, but they, like the school was making money off of them. So it's trying to give that to the athlete, but there's still a lot in place that needs to be figured out so that it's athletes still aren't being taken advantage of, I think. So I don't know. I don't know if I answered your question, but so I think the intent is good, but they still need to figure a lot of things out. In sports in general? Yeah, so his question was, what is the biggest thing I think could be improved in sports for the next generation? I I think I think we're seeing with COVID, like after COVID, and with I think I honestly think this generation um of athletes coming through want to see change in terms of, like, I think everything has become too political and um like, and we're afraid to have conversations and change and actually talk to people. And I think this generation is tired of seeing that and wants it to be um they, like, if you look through social media and the way that we're uplifting people in different ways, I think we need to have more conversations, and we need to I think have see where we're more alike than we think, and have those conversations and help uplift each other on both the men's and women's side. I think we're starting to see it equal out, and the men are supporting women and women are supporting men instead of being kind of headbutting each other. But I don't know if that's an answer to the question, but a thing that I see as like a good thing for the next generation. I think my generation sometimes sees like doesn't like generations before don't understand the next generation, where I think we're starting to see the good things that are coming out of this generation, not putting up with things that they don't like, and they're not afraid to say what they want and go after it. So I think not being afraid to make change is a big thing, um and I like that about this generation. I hope that continues. I don't know if I answered your question very well. I see good and bad in it. So I coached college for 8 years at Grand Canyon University, and I was an athlete. And when I was an athlete, we didn't really know you could there was kids that would transfer, but it was a scary process because you would go to schools and if you didn't, sometimes you would get in a program and it would be totally different than what you experienced on the phone call or the visit with that coach. And it just wasn't a good environment. And I feel as a coach, it's important that the athletes that I have are happy and are in the place where they can succeed. And sometimes it doesn't my type of coaching style isn't going to align with every person. And I don't want someone there that doesn't want to be there. But there are coaches that would were very like wouldn't would prevent athletes from being able to transfer at all. And they felt stuck and they couldn't find situations, or they felt they weren't going to they were going to have their scholarship revoked and they weren't going to have opportunities. I think the transfer portal created opportunities for athletes so that if they were in a bad situation, they could find a better situation. And it gave it helped in terms of allowing them to know what was out there. But I also think it's really important to find the best, and like the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And so I think right now the problem with it is we're seeing so many kids go in there just for more money, or they think it's going to be better situation, or they'll shop around and things, and it doesn't, there's no allegiance, and you're seeing kids not stay for distance running. It's really important. And I think in other sports too, where you like are in a program for a period of time so you can build off of each year, because it's like a 4-year commitment where you're trying to like build an athlete, get to know an athlete. And it's really hard to get to know an athlete if they're jumping around all the time, and to be able to build sustainability and where they can build off of each year. So if you're continually transferring, I think it's harder to build success and have continuity in your training or in your coaching environment or what you're feeling. So I think it can be really good so that athletes don't get taken advantage of, but it also can be really bad if that athlete is just jumping around. So I think it can be good and bad. Yeah. Yeah, I think so your question is how the exposure that the men's side. So I think I think it has to start with the support from probably the NBA and the WNBA together. And I think that's happened, but I think we have to it has to be a priority to the media in terms of, and so I think starting at the grassroots with social media, the fans that they have, expanding out to other people. You can do it in different ways where it doesn't have to be the mainstream media anymore, but it has to come from the people that really care about the industry in general, to expand it to people that don't normally see it. So I think it's been good with some of those, like with women's soccer. It's started to expand at that almost bigger level than the men's soccer in the US. But they've been getting support from everyone, like from people outside of the sport, to help grow it. So I think that's probably where it probably needs support from outside of just the NBA, WNBA. But I'm not an expert on that, and I don't know exactly. Yeah. So I think it probably needs exposure from sources outside of just the basketball area. Thank you so much. Any other? Thank you, guys.